G'day so-and-sos and welcome to my sewing room. My name's Kathy and in today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to make this tote bag that I designed for you. So this bag has a heap of structure to it. As you can see, it's sitting up nicely on its own. It's only got one zipper, and if you've never done zippers before, you can do it. I'm going to show you how. Don't panic. And then on the inside, we've just got a couple of slip pockets. It's super nice and roomy. It's very, very cute. So buckle up and let's get cracking. Let's have a look at what we need for today's project. So over this side, I've got some fabric. These are just cotton. This one is going to be for my main piece on the outside. This is going to be for my lining. Then the vinyl is going to be for my bottom accent piece and my straps. If you haven't used vinyl before, or if you just prefer to use cotton, then you do you. That's fine to use cotton for that. Then we have some clips, my zipper tape and a zipper head. I've got a couple of different size acrylic rulers just to make life easier and a good cutting mat. Then I have my rotary cutter. If you don't have one, you can just make do with scissors. I have my good scissors for my fabric and then my not so good scissors for the interfacing and zipper tape. Some clippers just to get rid of those loose threads and a marking tool. Then over here I have some interfacing. Now the interfacing I'll be using is just a nice light one for the lining. And then I have a medium to heavy one. This is buckram from Spotlight if you have a Spotlight near you. And then I have some iron-on foam to create the shape of our bag. Let's have a look at how to cut these pieces out. Let's have a look at how to cut out our fabric. Now I'm going to put all of these measurements into the description box. So before you start cutting, go there, write them down so you have that reference next to you. But I'm also going to pop them up on the screen as I go. So I have my main fabric and this is going to be 16 by 8.5, and I've cut 2 of these and I've cut 2 pieces of the medium weight buckram. Now out of this fabric I've also cut a 2" by 2" zipper tab, and I'm just going to use that light interfacing for that one. Then I have my lining pieces. Now my lining pieces are 16 by 13 inches, and of course we need to cut 2. And then I've cut 2 pieces of that light interfacing the same size for those ones. Now out of that lining fabric, I've also cut my slip pocket, and my slip pocket will be 13 by 11.5 inches. And again, I'm using that light interfacing for that one. Then I've got my vinyl for the outside bottom accent piece. And this piece will be 16 by 5.5, cut 2, and I've got the medium interfacing for that one. Vinyl can be interfaced, you just have to be super careful. Do a little test piece first, and when you interface vinyl, make sure that you are doing it so it is right sides down, and then you have your glue side down on top of that, and you are ironing from this side very carefully. Some vinyl is good, some is not so good. I've used this before, so I know what I can do with it. Like I said, do a test piece. And then I've cut out my straps. These are 40 by 4 inches. Now, I did you dirty. I should have told you that you also will be really benefiting if you have some double-sided sticky tape with your straps as well. So if you have some double-sided tape, that will help. Now, I'm not going to interface my straps. They don't need it, or if you wanted to, you could just use a light one. So then I've got my 17" zipper tape with my zipper head on there. If you haven't put a zipper head on before, I've got a couple of shorts up. And if you haven't used interfacing before, I've got a video that I did a couple of months ago, so have a look at that. Then I've got my foam pieces to give my bag structure. Now these are 13 by 16 inches, and it is a iron-on. It is also from Spotlight. Okay, so go and cut out your pieces and then iron on your interface. put on some good tunes while you do that. Enjoy the process, and I will see you back here shortly. So when we're sewing with vinyl, especially when we're making straps, it's important to test which way the stretch goes. Now, ideally, you want the stretch going that way, not that way. Now, unfortunately for me, the piece of vinyl that I had was cut in a way when I got it from the shop that the longest length of it went with the stretch. So I'm going to have to be very careful when I'm at the sewing machine and I'm making my straps. What I'm going to do, and I'll explain it again briefly at the machine, is when I sew my straps, I'm going to start at the top and I'm going to sew down one side, and then for the other side of the strap, I'm going to come back up to the top and start from that end rather than going down, zipping across the bottom and coming back up. If I did it that way, like went down across the bottom and back up, my strap is quite possibly going to stretch, and then that is going to cause the strap to have a twist in it. So when you cut out your vinyl, if it's possible for you, cut it so that the stretch is going that way and not that way. And if you're unlucky like me, then just be really aware of when you are sewing it at the machine that you are starting from the same end. The first bit we're going to work on is making our slip pocket and attaching it to our piece of lining. So grab your slip pocket. Now all we're going to do is find the longest edge, which is that edge, and fold it up in half. So this bit here is our short edge. And we're doing right sides together, which just means the pretty sides of the fabric are going together. And wax some clips on it just to hold it in place. And we're going to take this over to the sewing machine and we're going to sew up the sides and along the top, but we're going to leave a gap at the top of about 3 inches so that we can turn the slip pocket back out, just like that. So I'm going to sew up these sides and then along the top to those lines, and then I'm going to leave that bit there that I've marked open. Okay, so I'm going to start with my needle in my work, about a 3mm stitch length, and as always I'm going to backstitch. I've got about a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance there too. And then across the top, now I've done my markings on the other side, so about there, leave a good 3-inch gap or so, needle down, and down, remembering to backstitch. Done. So I have my slip pocket and my lining fabric here. What I'm going to do is just turn this one out carefully so that I don't rip those stitches. Poke those bottom corners right out. Now I'm just going to pull at those sides a little bit so that that top edge closes up nicely for me. Okay, I want you just to give this a bit of an iron so that I've got that pocket, that hole where we turned it out, sorry, folded in nice and neat. Now, what I'm going to do is take this over to the sewing machine and just top stitch along that top edge. I'm just going to lengthen my stitch length to about a 4.5. Now we're going to attach our slip pocket to our main piece. So what I'm going to do, this is the 16-inch edge along here and here. What I'm going to do is fold it in half and just take a snip out of that top edge there to mark my center. And then I'm going to open it up. I'm going to take my slip pocket. I'm going to fold that in half and just give it a little crease there. Take my ruler and measure down 2.5 inches from the top. I'm lining up my 6 on that snip line and then placing that crease in line with that 6 and that snip. And grab some pins, whack them in just to hold it in place. Now I'm going to take this over to the machine, and being careful to remember not to sew it down the top, I'm going to sew down the sides and along the bottom. Now I'm also going to sew down the middle. So I'm going to line up that ruler with that snip line with one of my lines running along the top of the slip pocket so that I know that it's square. And I'm just going to give myself a bit of a line. So I'm going to sew down the sides and bottom first, and then I'm going to stitch down this line so that we have 2 separate pockets. Now I want to be right on that edge. So it's about 1/8 of an inch. And I'm going to keep my stitch length that little bit longer. And I'm going to remember to back stitch because that top edge will cop some wear and tear as you're putting your hand in and out to get things in and out of there. And if there's any sort of weight, if you've got coins or anything in there. And then up the side. Sorry if you can hear Pumpkin. She's having a whinge because she's locked out. I'm going to have to let her in. And back stitch. So with this pocket, I'm going to start sewing from the bottom and work my way up to the top. If I started at the top and then went down to the bottom, it could bunch up on me. So this way, it'll sort of stretch it out up to the top and I won't get any bunching. So there's our pockets sewn on. Okay, I'm going to pop this to one side. Then I'm going to grab my zipper tape and my zipper tab. So I'm going to get my zipper tab and fold it in half. It doesn't matter which way because it's 2 inches square. And give myself that midline. And I'm going to open it up and fold in each side, each half to that midline. And then give that a bit of a hit. And then just fold it in half again. And this is just going to make the end of our zipper look neat and pretty. Okay, then I'm going to grab my zipper. Now, if my zipper is opening that way, then I want the zipper tape on this end because this will be the end. And I've just flipped that around. So if it's opening that way, you want it on this end. And just grab some clips. And we're going to take that back to the machine. And we're going to sew this on at about 1/8 of an inch at this edge. I want to stay about 1/8 of an inch so it's nice and close to that edge. Now, I'm just going to go 1 stitch at a time, nice and slowly over those teeth and keeping my fingers out of the way. Now, if your machine doesn't go 1 stitch at a time, just make sure you go nice and slowly. Let's have a look at these straps. So I'm going to grab one of my straps. I'm going to flip it over wrong side up and grab my ruler. Now what I want to do is make a line at 2 inches because our strap is 4 inches, so that's halfway. Now if you're using cotton for your strap and not vinyl, then I would suggest that you think about interfacing it just to give it a bit of structure, a bit of firmness, and I'll probably use the light interfacing for it. I'm going to grab my double-sided sticky tape and I'm going to lay that along that line, so along the halfway point as best I can. So I'm going to pull that tape off. Just going to show you one end. Then I'm going to fold these sides in to that midline. Now I want to be careful not to put pressure on it as I sort of push it down onto that tape, because if I do again, it's going to stretch. So I would do that all the way down that length. So imagine I've done that. And then I'm going to fold in the other side. And again, I'm just going to sort of pat it down rather than pressing it down the length of it. And then we're just simply going to fold it in half again and then clip it along that folded edge. Keeping those folds lined up as best we can. Now this part of it is a little bit time consuming. So again, put on some music, enjoy the process. Do all that, and at the end you should just have one long piece like that, which is clipped all the way along the end. Now you might notice my presser foot. It's a Teflon foot, so it's like plastic, and that will move over the fabric, over the vinyl, a lot easier than a metal foot. Now I have my stitch length at a good 4.5, and I'm staying nice and close to that edge. I'm going to try and line up this edge with the side of my presser foot and keep it there. And I'm going to readjust as I go down to make sure that my folded sides stay nice and even. So I'm coming down to the bottom, and then I'm going to take it out and start back on the same side, back at that top edge. And same thing, I'm going to keep this side lined up with the edge of my strap. Just like that, all the way down. So there's my straps all top stitched down. Cool, pop them up there. Now my dog Elvis has joined me, so if you hear any licking, snoring, any other bodily noises, it's the dog, I swear. So I'm going to grab my main panel lining piece and I'm going to fold it in half lengthways and then just take a little snip out of the top and the bottom edges to mark my corners, my centers. Now what I'm going to do is grab my ruler and some chalk. Now along the bottom edge, I'm going to measure 2.5 inches to the left and 2.5 inches to the right. Then at the top, I'm going to measure 3.5 inches to the left, 1, 2, 3, and then 3.5 inches, to the right and to the left. You know what I mean. Either way, either direction. I still can't tell my left from my right. Then I'm going to grab one of my straps. Now I want the side that I top stitched, that has the top stitching. So you'll be able to tell which side is the bottom and which is the top. So this inside piece is going to line up with that chalk mark. And then being very careful to make sure that I don't have any twists in my strap, I'm going to line up the other side so that the inside edge is lined up with the chalk mark. And I might have to readjust this in a minute when I do the top, but that's fine. And it's just overhanging just a little bit. And then I'm going to smooth that up, and then I can see where my top chalk mark is. Just going to pop one on there just where I line it up, and then same thing. That inside mark is lined up with that chalk. So you'll see that they're on a bit of an angle. That's what we want because our bag is going to be cut on a bit of an angle in a moment. So I'm going to measure up my strap 6 inches and then give myself a very light chalk mark across there. And then same on this side. Now what I'm going to do is take it over to the machine. I'm going to sew up across that chalk line and back down. And again, my strap is hanging down probably about 1 millimeter at the bottom. So I'm keeping my stitch length the same as what I did when I did my straps. And I'm going to try as best I can and lay my stitches along the same ones. Now, it's going to be impossible to lay them directly over the top, but I'm going to do my very best to get it as close as I can. Right up to that chalk line and then pivot and go across that chalk line. And then back down this side. Now the way I'm trying to keep these stitches lined up with the other ones on top is by watching right in the middle of my foot here and lining up my stitches with that foot, with that very middle of my foot. So I'm not trying to watch my needle and where it's going. I'm just watching the middle of that foot and the stitches as it goes under it. Okay, too easy. Do that to the other side and then do exactly the same thing to your other main panel piece. And then I will see you back at the table for the next step. I'm going to show you a little trick. So if you've been sewing with anything that has tape or glue on it, I've been sewing straps on that I've used double-sided tape for, you're going to end up with this gunk on your needle, all this sort of sticky residue. Now you don't want to be changing out your needle every 5 minutes. So what you can do is use some alcohol wipes and clean that gunk off your needle. Now you should always turn your machine off before you do this in case you bump the needle because your fingers are close. But I'm not doing that because you won't be able to see with the light. And just give that needle a bit of a rub, but I'm being very careful not to get my fingers underneath it. And that will get all that sticky residue off so you can keep using the same needle for a little bit longer. So there we have our straps sewn on. And I've got lots of little annoying threads everywhere. So what we're going to do now is grab those bottom vinyl pieces or bottom accent pieces, sorry, whatever you've made it out of. I'm going to grab one of our main pieces and then one of our vinyl pieces. We're going to place them right sides together, lining up along the bottom, and then clip that in place. Then we're going to take that over to the machine and we're going to sew along that edge at a good 3/8 of an inch because we want enough of a seam to be able to flip up and then top stitch over. I'm going to actually use that just so I stay even. Now I know with this machine that I should be able to get up and over those straps okay. But if you need to, grab a hump jump like that. Might use it anyway. Pop it under. Even though I think my machine could get up and over that, it will save me from ending up with skipped stitch. That's hard to say with a lisp. Skipped stitches. So do this to both pieces and then we'll talk about top stitching. So we want to iron this seam down in place so that we can top stitch. So what we're going to do is top stitch along this edge on the vinyl in a moment. So if I'm top stitching that way, then I want to make sure my seam is laying that way so that we're going over the seam. Now that is going to hold it down, but it's also going to help reinforce that piece. Okay. Then I'm going to take it back to the sewing machine. And like I said, we're just going to top stitch as close as we can to this edge, about 1/8 of an inch on both pieces. So let's go do that. Okay, so I've lengthened my stitch length. Start with my needle in my work. And I'm lining up this edge with the side of my foot, just like I did last time. Now, same thing again, we're going to be going over where those straps are. So if you need your hump jump, then go ahead and use it. And go nice and slow over those bumps. Making sure when you get to the machine too that your seam is laying down. And again, that bump, so I'm just gonna take it slow. Do this to both pieces and I'll see you back at the table. So there we have the bottom piece sewn on as well and our handle on. It's looking really good. Now, something important to remember, which I just did, but I won, is that you should never play bobbin chicken when you're top stitching. Now, that means that you shouldn't allow your bobbin to get down to the very end. Now, the thread that I was using, I only had a little bit of it left and I looked and I thought, oh, I think I can make it. And I did, thankfully, because that's all I need that thread for. But if you run out of thread halfway through your top stitching, even if you've got more, you're going to have to sort of start again and you're going to see where it overlaps. So always make sure you have a full bobbin. The next thing we're going to do is attach our foam to our main pieces. So I'm going to grab my ironing mat. And I'm going to place my foam with the glue side up. Now the glue side feels a little bit rougher and it wants to curve that way because that's the way it was on the roll in the shop. So glue side up, and then I'm going to place my fabric on top of that. And so I'm going to grab my iron and then just start attaching that main fabric piece. Now, it's very hard to do this from the back. Like I said with the vinyl, with the interfacing, you attach it from the back. But with the foam, it's just so thick that the heat just doesn't get through it enough. So get your foam attached very carefully if you are using vinyl on both your pieces. And then we'll look at how we're going to trim this bag down. So I've got my foam on my main pieces. Now what we're going to do is shape all of our pieces, but we're going to start with our lining pieces because they're a bit easier and it'll give us a little bit of practice first. So I'm going to pop one to the side. So what I'm going to do, this is the one with my slip lining obviously, so I'm going to make sure that my pockets are opening at the top, so I've got it the right way up. And what I'm going to do is measure in along the bottom 1.5 inches and make myself a line. And then same thing on the other side, 1.5 inches and make myself a chalk line. Easy so far. Then I'm going to grab my bigger ruler and a rotary cutter. Okay, I got my rotary cutter. Now, if you're anywhere near a spotlight, now today is, I think, the 9th of October, 2024. And if you're anywhere near a spotlight, I got a couple of these yesterday. I got the rotary cutter, and it comes, I think, with 7 extra blades on special for $10. Bargain. So I bought 2. Okay, that was just to let you know. So I'm going to line up my acrylic ruler with the very corner and my chalk mark. Being careful that it's even. And then I'm going to snip this whole side off. And that's why it's so important to make sure that you have your bag orientated the right way. I'm going to turn it upside down just because it's easy for me to work this way. So this is the top, lining it up with that corner, and then that end with that chalk mark. And carefully and slowly along that edge. So that is the shape that our bag is going to have. So I want you to go ahead and do that to both lining pieces, and then I'll come back and show you on the main piece again. We're going to do exactly the same thing to our main panel pieces. Now it is a little bit daunting, so I thought I would just walk you through it again, even though I'm sure you're fine and I'm sure you've got it, but we'll do it anyway. So 1.5 inches along the bottom on both sides. Now we've got some extra layers to go through, so we're going to be very careful. Line up my ruler with that top edge, that top corner, and that chalk line. Now if you wanted to, you could give yourself a good chalk line and use scissors. And I don't know if my rotary cutter will go through the foam anyway, honestly. But if you were unsure about using a rotary cutter to do that, then definitely use scissors for that, which I'm going to do to clean that up anyway, because it's not going to cut all the way through. Plus, I recommend you probably should use scissors anyway, just because of the amount of pressure that you'll need to put down with a rotary cutter. It's not a good idea with rotary cutters to have to push. First of all, because your ruler will slide and could mess up your cut line. But also, if your ruler slides or if your rotary cutter slides, you don't want to be chopping any parts of your anatomy off. That's never a good thing. So good sharp scissors all the way up. And there we go. That is looking so much better already just with that shape. Okay, I'm going to do that to the other piece, and then we'll talk about doing the corners. Now we're going to talk about how we're going to cut these corners, because our bag is going to have boxed corners, which is going to form the bottom of our bag. So follow along really closely and make sure when you do this that you have your piece orientated the correct way. So the longer edge is at the top and the shorter edge is at the bottom. Now this is what our corner is going to look like. We've got a straight edge here, but this one is on an angle. So what I'm going to do is grab my ruler and I'm going to line up my 2-inch mark. So that's 2 inches along there, and I've got it flat across the bottom, and then that is straight. So I'm going to give myself a 2-inch chalk line there. Now you'll notice that this edge of the fabric isn't lined up with the line, and that's because it's cut on an angle. But what I'm going to do now is turn it a little bit, and that's a 1/2 inch there, and 1, 2. So from my point here, I'm lining up that line with the fabric 2.5 inches. And then I'm going to give myself a little chalk line. Then I'm going to go from this point to that point and draw a line. So then I have that straight one and then this one. Now, if I were to measure just along that edge, then it's 2.5. So if you want to do it that way, just place your ruler up against the edge of your fabric and mark your 2.5, then you can do it that way if that is a little bit easier to get your head around. So go ahead and do that on all 8 corners. Watch that a few times over if you need to, and do that to all of the pieces, and then I'll see you back here. So what I'm going to go ahead and do now is cut out all of these corners, being careful just to snip to that line and up to that line, just like that. Now, cutting them at an angle like that is going to make the bottom of our bag sit a little bit nicer and a little bit flatter than if we just did 2 inches by 2 inches square. And you'll see what I mean when we box these corners. So I'm going to go ahead and do this to all of my pieces. And then we are going to start putting this thing together. So I'll see you back once we've got all that done. Now we're going to grab one of our main pieces and our ruler, and we're going to measure in 1 inch along this top edge and just give ourselves a little chalk mark there. Now what we're going to do is grab our zipper. Now I want this mark on the on the right hand side. Then grab your zipper and place it face down with your zipper tab just touching that chalk mark. So our zipper tape and our main fabric piece is right sides together, which again, remember, means the pretty side and the pretty side. And then we're just going to clip that along that edge. Now I'm going to grab one of my lining pieces and I'm going to place it right sides together with that. So what I'm going to do first, it might be an idea, is just if you've got some big clips or something, pegs, and just clip those handles down in place at the bottom there because you don't want them to get caught up. Then I'm going to grab my lining piece. And again, right sides together with everything. So that zipper tape is now sandwiched in the middle. And then just lay it on top, lining up those edges, and just move your clips to include that lining piece. Actually, I'm going to leave this one off for a minute. What we're going to do now is measure in 1 inch from this end and give ourselves a decent chalk mark there. I'm going to flip it over and just give myself a swipe on that side too, because I'm not sure what side it's going to be up at the sewing machine. I don't want to confuse myself. So now we're going to take this over to the sewing machine and we're going to sew at about just maybe 3/8 of an inch. Like I can feel the teeth of that zipper, and hopefully you can see that on camera. We want to get up nice and close, but not on those teeth. So as you sew, you're going to be using your finger to feel where those teeth are. So let's go do that. So I've changed out just to a black all-purpose thread again, and I'm starting at the end where that zipper tab is. So not the zipper head, which is the pretty butterfly, but that piece of fabric end, so the end of our zipper. And I'm going to back stitch a couple of times, and I've shortened my stitch length to about a 3. Now with this finger, I'm feeling, and this one actually, I'm feeling where that zipper teeth are so that I can keep that nice and straight and along the edge of those zipper teeth. Now we're going to do the butler method for the other end of our zipper, which I will show you. So I'm going to go up to where I made that 1 inch mark. So I'm going to get to about there. And then what I'm going to do is take that zipper head, that pretty butterfly. I'm going to open this up and I'm going to pull that zipper head down past my foot there. And then I'm going to separate that tape and I'm going to pull that piece of tape down out of the way. So now I've just got that one piece of tape along the edge of my fabric. I'm going to close that back up, carefully go along up until where that mark is. And this is why I left this piece of tape longer than the bag. Then what I'm going to do is lift up my presser foot. I'm going to pull that tape up to a 90-degree angle, pop my foot back down, go forward over those teeth, go backwards, and then up to the end. And then backstitch a little bit. Done. Let's go to the table and talk about next step. Okay, so let's take those clips off where I had those handles on. And we're going to fold that wrong sides together. And have a look at this. Now see how nicely that zipper just disappears into the fabric? That's called the butler method. And if that's the first time you've done that, you should be pretty proud of yourself because it's a little bit fancy. Now what we're going to do is iron this down flat. So I'm going to grab my ironing mat again, pop that on, and I'm going to iron from the lining side. Now you're not going to get it to lay perfectly flat, so just be aware of that. But we're going to top stitch again, like what we did along the bottom. So we want to try and get this sitting as flat as we can before we top stitch that down. So I'm going to sort of pull it and make sure it's not bunching up as much as I can. Open up that zipper and try and get that a little bit flat. But with that foam in there, it's hard. But what we could do, I don't like doing it, but what you can do if you want to is cut that foam into facing a little bit shorter at the top and bottom and the sides. Just come in a mil or so, a 1/4 inch, so it's not in your seams. But I actually don't mind it in my seams because I find that it adds a little bit of strength and you don't have that sort of line where you go from a lot of interfacing or foam to just nothing. There we go. So clip that down to hold it in place a little bit better. And then what we're going to do is take that back over to the machine and we are going to top stitch right along this top edge at about 1/8 of an inch. Now I'm leaving that long piece of zipper tape in there just because I want to sew over that in there just to give it that little bit more reinforcement. So let's go do that. So I'm top stitching, so I'm going to lengthen my stitch length back to about that 4.5. And I'm lining up this outside of my zipper foot with this edge of the fabric. And off I go. So you might notice that I didn't back stitch there. That's because that side is going to be caught up in the seam anyway. And I don't want any sort of double stitches showing on that edge with my top stitching, if that makes sense. So staying nice and close to the top, about 1/8. Nice and slow and careful because you want your top stitching to look nice. It's holding that seam down, but it's also decorative. So we want it to look pretty. Now what we're going to do is grab our other main fabric piece. I'm going to flop those handles down and just stick a clip on them. And we're going to place these right sides together. So pretty side to pretty side. Except this top one is going to shift up a little bit. So we want it lining up with the edge of that zipper tape. So you'll notice that it doesn't line up along these corner bits in the bottom, but that's fine. Just as long as the sides are lined up. And then we are going to clip that in place with that zipper tape. Then we are going to grab our lining and do the same thing on the other side. So flip it around. Oh, I've got long threads hanging off everywhere. Clip them when you see them because you don't want to finish your bag and then find them. Okay, so then lining sides together, same thing. We're going to line that up with the edge of the zipper tape so that our sides line up and our top lines up with the edge of that tape. And then just shift your clips to include that lining piece. Okay, so same thing. Find your ruler, measure in about 1 inch from that open zipper end. And I'm going to mark 1 inch on this side too, just so whatever side I have it at the machine, I'm set. So same thing, we're going to take that back over to the machine and do exactly what we just did, making sure that we start from this end where that zipper tab is, and then we finish up this end so we can do the same thing with that zipper tape. Let's go do that. So exactly the same thing. I'm going to start at the end where that zipper tab is. I've shortened my stitch length back to about a 3. And I'm going to back stitch. And I'm using my fingers to feel where those teeth are. And I'm lining up this edge pretty much against the teeth. So this width of the foot will give around the distance that we want that stitch line to be from the teeth. So you don't want a whole heap of zipper tape showing because it tends to get a bit of a wave in it and it just doesn't look neat. You don't want it right on the teeth because then it'll be hard to pull your zipper head across. But you definitely don't want too much tape showing. Okay, so same thing, I'm going to stop about there. I'm going to make sure that butterfly is out of my way, that zipper head. Now I could feel that my lining sort of stretched and shifted just a little bit. So my chalk mark, oh, it's still pretty good. It's maybe a little bit off now. So the zipper disappears into the fabric there. Yeah, I'm still pretty good. It's good to check anyway, because I could feel that fabric shifting. So I'm going to stop there, lift up my presser foot, take my zipper tape to about 90, forward, back, up to the edge, back stitch, back to the table. There we go. Now we can go ahead and use your not so good scissors and snip that zipper tape down a bit. Okay, let's open it up and have a look at this side. So that's our side where we've already top stitched. So I'm going to open it up, have a little finger press and grab my ironing mat again. And do the same thing as what we did before. Now we've just got a bit more bag to contend with, so we're going to be careful. So we're going to iron this edge down as much as we can. We're almost done. It's coming along really well. Okay. Whack some clips on there. Pulling that down. You'll be able to feel that seam in there when you're doing this. So you'll be able to sort of feel and press it down in place. And then one on the end will definitely help. So might pop one on that end too. All right, back to the machine and we'll top stitch that on the other side. Okay, we've got a bit more bag here to contend with now, so take your time to get comfortable and get in a comfortable space, and you might need to sort of fold bits up a little bit as you go. So I've lengthened my stitch length, it's hard to say, back to about a 4.5. And same thing, I'm lining up the outside of my foot with the edge of the fabric. And I'm just having to fold my bag up a little bit at this end to get it under my machine, and I've kept the zipper open just so I can sort of have the other end of the bag out of the way. So this is what our bag should look like. We've got the outside pieces and then the lining pieces. Now what we're going to do is grab these straps, and I'm just going to clip them together with some of my big clips. Now if you don't have any of these, just use a peg or something, just so they're out of the way. Then I'm going to get the main panel pieces and fold them in together, lining them up along the bottom, those corners, tuck those straps in out of the way, and I'm going to whack some clips down along that side. Now you want to make sure that you really do have your straps out of the way, because we don't want to be sewing over those. And then a few along the bottom. And then same thing down this side. Making sure those corners line up. Now, one of the most important places to make sure it lines up is this top edge here. The corner bits where all 4 bits sort of come together. And a clip in there. Cool. Now, same thing with the lining. Making sure those corners line up. There we go. So that it's not, I'm really sort of pulling it. I've got my elbow on this piece and pulling that bit so it's not bunching up anywhere. Make sure those corners are looking good. Don't panic if they're not perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect. We're going for good. Because when we stitch it all together, our seam length on the lining bit especially is going to be a little bit wider, so that there is room for error if it has shifted around on you. Now with the bottom of the lining, I'm just going to whack one clip on either side because we're going to leave this bottom piece open on the lining. That is where we are going to turn the bag out from. So go ahead now and give yourself a nice big X on each side so that you don't forget. So on the bottom bit, we're only going to come in about an inch on each side, and we are going to backstitch and then backstitch some more because it's going to be a big job to pull it out of that hole and we don't want it to rip. So what we're going to do is take it over to the machine. I'm going to start from one of these corners. I'm going to sew up this edge at about a quarter of an inch, a quarter to 3/8 of an inch, just enough to make sure you're catching both those sides. Then we're going to sew over our join. That's why we left a good inch gap. And then down our lining. Now, when we go down our lining, we're going to start off around the same, around 3/8 of an inch, let's say. And then as we go down to this corner, we're going to get just a little bit wider to about 5/8 of an inch down to this bottom edge. So it's just going to slope down a little bit. And then we're going to go back and do the same thing on the other side, exactly the same. And then we're going to sew close the bottom of the main panel pieces. Again, leaving that bit. Once we've done all that, we'll come back and we'll talk about how to flatten out and clip the corners, and then we'll sew the corners, and then we're almost done. Okay, let's go do that. Okay, I've shortened my stitch length back down to about a 3. Start with my needle in my work, and I'm about a quarter of an inch there. But a quarter to 3/8 is fine. If you need that 3/8 to make sure that you are catching both sides, then that's fine. Okay, now I'm feeling with this hand to feel where those straps are because I don't want to catch them. Now we're getting up to where that zipper head is. So I'm going to open it up and poke it down out of the way. Now I'm going to be really careful not to go too wide here because I don't want to go over the edge of that zipper. Now I might need my hump jump here just to get over all of that because I can feel those teeth are right there and down onto my lining. Just going to pivot my work a little bit. So like I said, as I go down the edge of this lining, I'm just gradually getting that little bit wider of a seam length there. All the way down and backstitch. Make sure that I've grabbed both sides and then do the same thing on this side. Backstitch really well, and then same thing here. Use my hump jump, pop that under there, nice and slow, and then lift and just pivot a little bit because it just goes in that little bit of an angle, a little bit wider down to that 5/8 or so of an inch. Okay, now we're just going to close up the main panel piece. So along the bottom there. Backstitch really well. Just going to be a stress point. And then back stitch. Okay, so needle in about 1 inch, and I'm just going to go back and forth a few times. And then up to this edge. And you'll see that my fabric shifted around on me a little bit, so I'm not lining up the best there. But like I said, we've got room for error. So if yours did that too, don't worry. And just go back and forth a few times. That bit. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is just snip down these seams. I'm just going to cut them down to a good 1/4 inch. Now I'm not going to worry about the bottom of the lining piece because we still have work to do on that. But if you had to go a little bit wider on your foam pieces as well, then you would snip them down. Mine aren't too bad. I want to take a little bit off. Okay. And down this side. Okay. And just snip those out of the way. Now we're going to look at what we do with these corners. I really like doing this bit. Okay, so I'm going to grab some clips and have them handy. And I'm going to start with the main piece. So I'm going to grab one end and I'm going to stick my fingers in there and pull it open and then together like that, so that my seams are together. Now, if you have to manhandle, then that's fine, so that my seams are together here. And then whack some clips on there. To hold it all in place. Now, use plenty of clips because it will want to pop open, especially on this main piece. Okay, same thing with this corner. I'm going to stick my fingers in there, in those corners, and pull and push those seams together. So do you see how that creates the bottom of the bag? So we've gone from a really flat bag to something that's going to be quite 3D. And I'm going to do the same thing to these lining pieces. Just stick my fingers in and push those seams together. So same thing with this corner, fingers in, seams together. Now have a look at this seam, like this bit here. See how I've folded it down to my right? I want to do the same thing on this end. When I put those seams together, I want to fold that down to the right so that it's going in the same direction. Just so it sits nicely. Now what we're going to do is take it back to the machine, and on each of these corners, we're going to sew at a good 3/8 or slightly more if you need to, even 1/2 inch if you need to on these lining pieces. If you don't need to, just stick to 3/8. And same thing on the main piece. So make sure you've used lots of clips because over at the machine, we're going to be shifting around and everything. See you there. Okay, so I've got this main piece. So we want to do that first because they're the ones that are more likely to pop open. I've got the majority of the bag facing upwards and then the side of the bag is against the bed of my sewing machine. I'm going to pop it under there, get all that out of the way. I've got a shorter stitch length. So I'll get that out of the way of the camera. Shorter stitch length, and I'm going to remember to back stitch, and then I'm going to back stitch again and go a little bit slower over that seam. If you need to use your hump jump, go ahead. and then down that edge, back stitch and back stitch. Okay, now what I'm going to do is check and make sure that I can see that vinyl all the way through there. So maybe just in that corner I haven't quite caught it. But what you want to do anyway is go back and do another line and just give it that little bit of extra. So I'm like 1/2 mil further up, or even just over that existing stitch line. But I know down here that most of that is foam and I barely caught that vinyl, so I'm going to go a little bit wider. And back stitch, back stitch. Right, do the other main corner and then we'll do the lining. Okay, so same thing with the lining piece. I've got the side of my bag against the sewing machine bed and the rest of it sort of facing upwards. So pop that under there, go a little bit wider with the lining and back stitch and back stitch. And then straight across. And make sure you don't go further up than that bit that we closed up the bottom with. And then back and back. Now, you don't need to do it twice on the lining because it's on the inside, so it doesn't have the same sort of pressure that's on our main piece. So do the other corner of your lining as well, and I'll see you back at the table. This is what our bag will look like now. So snip away some of that. I'm going to just trim away that excess along those bottom corners, making sure that I've caught both sides. Trim that down to about 1/4 inch. Get rid of some of that foam out of our corners. And then we're going to turn it out. So I hope you had your Weet Bix this morning. So you're going to take your hand, you know what your hand is. You're going to take your hand and just push that zipper all the way open. Okay. And grab one of these bottom corners. Now, you want to be gentle because we don't want to rip anything. There is nothing worse than when you are doing this and you hear that rip noise. Man, heartbreaking. And it is hard work. So if you haven't done one of these before, this is called birthing. And I think you can figure out why. And we're just going to push and sort of fold that lining back out onto itself. And then pull and pull that lining down around the rest of the bag. There is a knack to it, like with sort of turning it out like that rather than, see how it's now turning out rather than pulling it. If you continue to pull it, then you're going to cry because it's going to rip. So gentle, gentle, gentle. Push these corners out. And when you do this, check them and make sure that you have caught all of it. If you can see any of the inside seam or any foam, turn it back out and go back to the machine. You've come too far to leave it with dodgy corners. So with these top corners, I'm going to close this zipper a little bit and then push it out with my thumb. And that's why we left a good inch on both of those edges. Oh, and that zipper looks lovely the way we did that. Okay, so that is what our bag is going to look like, but a lot neater. What we're going to do now is go back to the sewing machine and sew up this edge. But what I'm going to do is just iron that seam a little bit flat before I do that, and then take it back over and close that up. Make sure you push these corners out really well before you try and do that. Okay, let's crack the iron out again. So I'm just going to iron that flat. Da-da! Whack some clips across that. And then I'm going to take that back to the sewing machine and just sew from end to end. So it's already stitched about half an inch, whatever we did there. But I'm going to start from the very end anyway, and just about 1/8 of an inch go all the way across. Now I'm not going to bother filming that. You know how to do that. If you've come this far, you can do that. And I'm tired and don't want to move the camera again. So I will see you back here in a moment and we'll iron it out and have a look. Okay, there we go. Now I'm going to take it and stuff all that lining down into the bag, pushing those corners down into place. Whew, she's pretty. She's a good size too. Okay, now I'm going to get my iron and shove it on in there. Okay, and then other side. Okay, now I want to iron this seam flat, so I might actually use this here. Again, being really careful not to hit vinyl, because man, that would suck if we hit our vinyl and melted our bag at this stage. But this is really important to do. You really want to iron it into shape, because that interfacing creases a lot when we're turning it out and bashing it around. Pop that corner right out. So you need muscles to make bags. Okay. And then being really careful not to hit any of that vinyl. Iron that bit flat as well. Cool. Okay. And then this main panel piece, I'm just going to get up and over it. Sorry if I go out of the frame. Okay. Wouldn't be a day if I didn't burn myself. Right. Get that thing out of the way. Like it's the iron's fault. And there we have it. Pretty cool. I really like that. We're so clever. So if you've come this far with me, as usual, please like and subscribe. Help me get those YouTube algorithms going. Leaving a comment apparently is good. So if you want to help me out, do that. Thanks for coming along. Hope you enjoyed it. And remember, it's only fabric. And I will see you next time. Bye. Bugger.